Well, today I'm going to be talking about the subject of refuge as seen in the Old Testament through archaeology and through the history of the people there. So, we will look carefully at all these pictures and I'll be giving you a volume of information actually. So, it will be a very interesting journey. And so, I'm going to go into screen share and show you all these pictures and explain each of them to you. We have already prayed at this time, and so therefore we will directly go into the message for this evening. The study of the word refuge in the Old Testament. It's a historical journey through the whole Old Testament, and I'm going to show you how important and how critical it is for us who are children of God to have refuge in God. Throughout the Old Testament and in the succeeding ages, of course, people always relied on God, those who believed in God, believing that God is their refuge. But I want to explain to you the meaning of this word as it is processed through history in the Old Testament. Here you are seeing a flower which is called as the Egyptian caper. And this flower, the bud that you see over there, which you can see on the screen, the flower, two flowers and a bud. The bud is often used in European cuisine as salad, part of their salads, the bud of this flower. But this plant grows wild in the land of Egypt. And I'm going to trace the history of the word refuge as I go through this presentation. The scientific name for this flower is Capparis aegyptica. You will find this flower in different regions. But today, first of all, I'm going to show you one of the refuges in the mountains of Israel. This is a place which is called as the Monastery of St. George of Kosiba. The Monastery of St. George of Kosiba was built by the Greek Orthodox Church and founded in 420 AD by 5 hermits. It was built right next to the cave where Prophet Elijah stopped en route from Sinai and was fed by ravens. Numerous cave-dwelling hermits lived here in imitation of the great prophet. The monastery was abandoned after the Persians swept through the valley in 600 AD and massacred about 14 monks. It was restored again by the Crusaders in 1179. The present monastery was rebuilt around 1900 by the Greek Orthodox Church. And the bones and the skulls of the martyred monks can still be seen today in the monastery chapel. The first monks to settle as hermits in these caves in the part of this Wadi Kelt were named as Prono, Elias, Gannaius, Ainan, Zenon, and this is about 420 AD. And legend has it that Elijah stayed in the same region for 3 years and 6 months on the way to Sinai and was fed by ravens. And we read about this story in 1 Kings chapter 17 verses 2 to 10. Some scholars even refer to this valley as the David's valley of the shadow of death. You know, yesterday we were in Psalm 23 and I talked to you how God is our protection. For thou art with me, and that is the key thing that keeps us strong in all the troubles and storms of life. Now this valley over here, and in the Jewish language and even in it has become a geographical term today. This valley is called as Wadi, W-A-D-I, and this name of this particular Wadi is called as Kelt. So this is called as the Wadi Kelt, in which we find the monastery of St. George of Kosiba. And we find that in this monastery, of course, monks stayed over here. But in 600 AD, these monks, about 14 of them were killed because the Persians swept through. So even though this was a refuge and a living point, but yet, you know, they were massacred. The Wadi, this is called as Wadi because during times of the monsoons, suddenly there will be rain and the rain would flood this valley with a gush of water. So it is dangerous to be in that Wadi at the time of these storms. But anyway, I will explain that a little later some more. And here you can see, okay, I don't know if I can show you, maybe I should put a red marker, laser pointer, and I can show you over here. You know this, can you see this route over here? Can you see the route that I'm showing you? This route, this is of course the same road that was about 2000 years old. The road through which once upon a time Jesus traveled along with his mother and father. That road has not changed. It's a single track pathway and only one person can travel at a time. So when caravans would go, they would have to travel in single file. Now, before I go further into this and explain to you, let me show you the previous picture. In the previous picture, you can see these are the modern roads. Okay, these are the modern roads that you see. Okay, and the Wadi Kelt over there. And I don't know if you can see the structure over here. Can you see the structure over here? There is something like a staircase. You can't see it maybe in your cell phone, but don't worry. I'll take it closer and I'll show you the close-up image of this. Okay. Now, now in this picture, you can see the road is there, but from here, this edge on the right-hand side edge, it's a normal road. It is an ancient road. That is the same 2000-year-old road. So what would happen is that Jesus and Mary, would have to travel from Nazareth to the bottom of the Sea of Galilee, where the Jordan River begins. Okay, they would travel in an eastward direction, and then from the Jordan River they would travel vertically. Okay, so they would travel vertically and they would come down. Okay, and then they would come to the place which is Jericho, and from Jericho they would travel by this road that I'm showing you. Okay, ancient road, and they will climb up this mountain, come to the top, and from here they will go all the way to Jerusalem. That was the ancient route. Now I'm going to show you that ancient route. Part of that ancient route, the road is over here. Okay, you can see this road, right? This road here, and it is continuing over here. The road is continuing here, and you can see it continuing on the top. Okay, it's going like that. So this is that road, and this is of course the monastery of St. George of Koziba. And I'm going to show you, move closer and show you. Now maybe you can see the staircase over here. Can you see the staircase over here? Yeah, maybe you can see. I'll show it to you a little more closer. But I don't know if you can see this building over here. You can't see the building because it's almost the same color as the rocks. But I'll go closer and show you. Okay, that is the staircase. And this is the structure, the building over there. Okay, I'll go closer and show you. This is the staircase. Okay, now the staircase is clearly visible. You go inside the mountain, and inside the mountain there's a staircase that takes you up to this structure over here. Can you see the structure now? Okay, so what the monks would do, they would carry their supplies, maybe water, sometimes they would take even their food, and they would be inside this place for anything from 1 week to 2 weeks, spending time silently and absolutely all alone with God. Most of us, we spend time with God and we fast and we pray when we are in groups. But very rarely do we fast alone. Now, these monks would fast all alone by themselves in this place. And they would do that for about 1 week or 2 weeks, not talking to anyone. Technically, it's a lockdown, but a self-lockdown in which they spend time with God. So this is the way the monks would find a refuge when they would want to spend time with God. This was their mountain refuge. Earlier, Elijah was in this place and he found this as a place of refuge, and God provided his food, even with ravens. So this was one place of refuge. And so the monks would come and they built in the same place where Elijah was fed by the ravens, believing that God will also protect them and keep them safe. So here, of course, we see the entrance, we see the desert refuge, okay, and then we see the monastery. right? So as we go further, now this is the wadi that you see over here, no? The place in which, now if you look at this place over here, only one person can walk. Sometimes it's not possible to two people to walk together. Husband and wife can't walk together. They have to walk one behind the other. And as you can see, this comes down to a plain, and this actually leads to the Jericho of the New Testament. Okay, and then now, of course, behind you can see some modern buildings, and this is of course flat. But even in this place, where it is probably not very deep, okay, but even in this place, it is dangerous to stand if there is a flood. And when the storm comes, there can be a flash flood. In Israel, they call this as a flash flood. The flash flood completely goes through this terrain, and anybody caught inside that, even if you are the best Olympic swimmer, you will die. You cannot survive in this flash flood. In fact, at one point in time, there was a storm, and we had to go through this region, and we were prevented from growing in this region because what, the storm is so heavy, it can actually push you off this escarpment. And so here you see in other places, we can see this is about 30-foot deep, and in some places it will be 60-foot deep. As we move towards the monastery of St. George of Koziba, it is about 60 feet deep. This is what scholars call as the valley of the shadow of death. Maybe when David was taking his sheep through this region, the sheep would have to follow him in single file. And if they didn't hear the tapping of his staff on the ground, they would become agitated and go off in wrong direction, fall down the cliff, and maybe get injured or even die. And that's why, hearing the staff of the shepherd, the sound of the staff of the shepherd was a comforting sound. And so therefore, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. So this is oftentimes referred to as the valley of the shadow of death. And here, this is another place where we can see, you can just travel in single file. It is dangerous. But this road is 2,000 years old, more than 2,000 years old. It was the same road that Jesus and Mary used. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph used. You can imagine, what, for them, if you read the Gospels, it took them 3 days to travel and come to Jerusalem, right? Okay, and they came through this route. Okay, and then what happened? When they came through this route, they came to Jerusalem, and Jesus was taken. He was 12 years old. He was taken to the temple after the ceremony. They came back, but Mary thought that he is with Joseph. Joseph thought that he is with Mary, right? As a result, they didn't know that Jesus was with neither of them. And when they started searching, they couldn't find. So you can imagine the plight and the fear of the mother as she was trying to walk, and by this time 3 days had gone. So that means what? 3 days of travel, okay, 2 days of searching in Jerusalem, totally 5 days they didn't find Jesus. And while they were traveling through this route, Mary would have been looking into every ravine, every place, thinking, had he fallen down over here? Had he fallen down over here? You can imagine the panic of the mother, right? Only a mother knows what that panic is. So here we see, this again, I think somebody's mic is on. I think Miss Evelyn's mic is on. And yeah. Oh, yeah. Susan has just come in, so she needs to mute her mic. Miss Kurian, your mic also needs to be. I muted it now, so don't do anything about it. Okay. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, we'll continue. So, yeah, everyone is muted. Yeah, everyone is muted. I think. Let me just look. Yeah. Okay. Fine. Let's continue. So, this is that valley in which we find that Mary would have traveled and she went into panic because of all that was happening over there. So this is that dangerous part, the wadi. It is called as wadi, and even today these places are called as wadis because when the storm comes, water drains from them and comes into the Jordan River and also into the Sea of Galilee from these different wadis. So these wadis, when the rains come, there is a flash flood, and the flash flood is dangerous. Anybody caught inside this wadi would, eventually die. So this is what David called as the valley of the shadow of death. Now I'm going to move to another community, and of course, when the monks stayed in 600 AD, they were, 14 of them were killed, and that refuge, even though they thought this was the place where God kept Elijah, it wasn't their refuge. So the man-made refuge did not really protect them, even though they wanted to only spend time with God. Now we are looking at another community. This is called as the Qumran community. This is the leftover remains of the Qumran community. Now on this right-hand side of the image, you will see some, sand mountains, and I'll go into that. And in this community, of course, a group of people used to stay who were called as the Essene or the Essenoi. Essenoi for plural, Essene for singular. And they stayed away from everybody else, and they lived almost a monastic lifestyle over here. We know about the Pharisees in the New Testament. We know about the Sadducees in the New Testament. The Sadducees were basically and essentially of the priestly clan. Whereas the Pharisees, sometime around 200 AD, they started from a group of the people called the Hasidim or the Chassidim, and their original intention was to maintain the purity of the scriptures. While the people in the priestly clan, they bartered their faith, they diluted their faith in order to maintain their political power in the land of Palestine. They diluted their faith, and the result of that was the Pharisee movement. And the Pharisees were basically of a lay movement, it was from the lay people. And then there was a third category who were called as the Essene. The Essene were actually people who didn't want to get involved in the spiritual dilution of the Sadducees. They didn't want to get into political advocacy for nationalism of the Pharisees. They retreated down to the southern part of Judah and lived a monastic lifestyle, just obeying, reading the scriptures, and living a lifestyle that is separate from the others. And one of the things about these people was that it was basically a male community, but there were also women. And if the married people wanted to be a part of this community, the women had to stay separately, and the men would be part of this group, and they could go back to their wives and their families and spend time with their families. But women were not a part of this community. It was basically a male community. And they were more bothered about the preservation of scriptures and the study of scriptures. Now you can see over here how they preserved their scriptures and wrote their scriptures. This was their basic job. This picture I took is in a place, because if the moment you see this cup over here, you can see it's not an ancient picture. It's a recent picture, because somebody belonging to the modern age, and he's got a nice coffee cup over there on the left. So this is how they wrote the scriptures. But of course, this photo that I took was from a place in Israel, different place in Israel, where they dealt with copying of the scriptures. So it's a place called Niyat Kedumim. So we don't need to go into all the details. So they still write scriptures in the same ancient way, making their own ink and writing with styluses. So and this is how the Jewish scripture, the scroll, looks like when they unfold. You remember in Luke chapter 4, Jesus went and unrolled the scroll and read to that passage in Isaiah, where it told something about messianic promise. So this is a scroll, and the language, of course, there is Hebrew. And then, this is, of course, a parchment. A parchment is a leather scroll in which scrolls, the leather is specially prepared so that you can write on it. And this, of course, would be the paper that you see over here. This would be papyrus paper material. So in the ancient world, why was this called parchment? Because this goes back to the book of Revelation, where we see one of the cities named Pergamum. And Pergamum had a very beautiful library, an enormous library, where they continued to maintain records from every other place in the world. Okay, collect books and scrolls and manuscripts of every kind, and they had a huge library in Pergamum. And they had to get paper or papyrus for writing and documentation of all the material. And that papyrus used to come all the way from Alexandria or from Egypt. Now, what happened was, when their library became larger, or seemingly was threatening to become larger than the library in Alexandria, Alexandria refused to send them papyrus. So they came up with a new material made with leather, and that was called as parchment. Parchment actually comes from the word pergamum or pergament. From there we get the word parchment. So etymologically, it comes from the word parchment comes from the city called Pergamum, and so that's why the leather scrolls are called as parchments, and the other scrolls are called as papyrus scrolls. So we have two types of material used in writing. And this, of course, is the community scroll of the people who lived in the Qumran region. And that is what we famously called as the Dead Sea Scrolls, which was discovered in 1977. In 1977, they discovered many, many scrolls found in the region of the Qumran community, where the Essene people, or the Essenoi in plural, they actually live. And this is their community scroll, something like what we have in the Methodist Church as the Book of Discipline. So this was technically their book of discipline, what they should do and what they should not do. It is found in, if you go to Israel, you'll find it in the shrine where they have housed all the scrolls, and you cannot take pictures over there with flash. So you know, most of you know that I don't use my flash at all. So I was able to take some of these pictures. And then we come back here. I'm going to show you on the right-hand side, you'll see a mountain, and I'm going to go closer to that mountain. This is that mountain. Now, in this mountain over here, you can see on the left-hand side was that, leftover of that city of the Qumran people. And here you can see something that is like a cave. I'll go closer and show it to you. This is that cave. This is cave number 4. There are roughly about 11 caves later on discovered. Actually, one Arab boy was going through this region, and he was simply throwing stones to see if he could accurately send a stone through a cave. When he sent the stone through a cave, something broke. So he managed to find a way to get into that cave. And he went and he found lots of scrolls. And he went and sold them in the market for money. By the time it came to the news of the authorities, they knew that a cave had been discovered with ancient scrolls. And they found out that many of the scrolls discovered in these caves were roughly about more than 1,000 years older than the manuscripts that we had in the Old Testament. The previous manuscripts that we had in the Old Testament, by which we translated portions of the Bible in the Old Testament, okay, now they discovered manuscripts that were 1,000 years older than the manuscripts that we had so far. That was in 1947. But subsequently, they discovered many more manuscripts, not just in these scrolls, but in other places, they discovered many more scrolls and manuscripts of the New Testament, which are older, much older than the manuscripts that we had before. So you see, this was the place where they originally discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, and this was in 1947. Afterwards, they discovered there were about 11 caves like that in this region. Now, how did the Qumran community or the Essene people, how did they manage to survive in a desert region? It is completely dry. How did they manage to survive? Now, what you see over here is not a waterfall, but what happens during a flash flood when water repeatedly goes through this region. The silt that has washed in this region is of a bluish color and leaves trace behind. So this is the leftover of a flash flood. And what would they do? 6 months there would be no rain. Okay, then 3 months there would be heavy rain and there would be flash floods. They would use these flash floods to collect water for themselves. One thing about the Qumran community is they were obsessed with water. They were obsessed with water purification rituals. And I will show you some of them. So the water would be channeled through, canals like this, okay? And then the water would come in to other man-made canals, okay? Where the water in a flash flood would rush through these canals, and then it would fill a cistern on the left, okay? The ritual bath over here, it would fill a cistern on the right. It would fill, when it overflows, it would fill another cistern over here in the front. And in this way, and what would happen is it would fill the cistern. When the water level is at this level, it will fill this cistern. When it rises above this level, it will go to fill another cistern. And in this way, they had about 38 cisterns. Now, this cistern that you are seeing over here, okay, its width and its depth would be larger than a cinema theater hall. Okay, can you imagine how deep and how wide this is? Wider than a cinema theater and deeper than longer than a cinema theater in its depth. Like this, they had about 38 cisterns, which they would use to survive the rest of the dry months in that desert land. In fact, then and even today, there is a proverb among the Israeli people. They say, if you want to be rich, go to the north. If you want to be wise, go to the south. Why? What was there in the south? Desert. Who lived there in the desert? The Qumran people. You want to be wise? Go to the south. You want to be rich? Go to the north. Why? Because it's an agricultural community. In the north, there's a lot of water. The Sea of Galilee is there. Mount Hermon is there. Fantastic lands are there. Plains are there. You can cultivate. So you can become rich if you go to the north. And you can become wise if you go to the south. So the saying is found even today among the Israeli people. So the desert is a place of wisdom. So these were how this Qumran community survived. Now this is a ritual bath. If you see very carefully, there is a staircase to come into this ritual bath. Then there's a staircase to come outside. So you come through one staircase and you go through another staircase. There are many like that, You come through one and you go out through another way. So why was it like that is because when they wanted to purify themselves, they would go and take the purification bath. It's called as a mikveh in Jewish language. They would go to a mikveh and take a bath. They'll wash themselves clean. Not bath means like with soap and water. They'll dip themselves inside it. And then they will come out of it. They will not walk in the same route that they walked in. They will walk in through another route. Why? If they walked in through the same route, they would defile themselves. So they would walk in through another route after the purification. And that way, they were obsessed with water purification rituals. In fact, when they used to write and copy the scrolls, what would they do with the scrolls? When they were copying the scrolls, when one scroll is very old and it is getting torn, what would they do? They would write a new scroll. And they would keep the old scroll and preserve it. But they would use the new scroll. So when they are writing and they come to the word Jehovah, which in the Jewish language, because it's a consonantal language, it had only 4 letters, YHWH, Yahweh. They never pronounced that word, the Jewish people. Okay. And when they are writing that also, what will they do? When they come to that word and they have to write it, they won't write it. They'll keep their pen and their ink. They'll come to the water purification ritual. They'll go into this mikveh. They will take a dip. Then they'll come out, purify themselves. Then they will come and write the word Yahweh. After two sentences, again, if the word Yahweh comes, they'll keep the pen. They'll go and purify themselves. And then they'll come. That is how they wrote the scriptures. They were obsessed with water purification rituals. In fact, the SNA people, if you wanted to be a part of their community, the only way you can be a part of their community was by water baptism. So water baptism did not start with Jesus. It did not start with John the Baptist. It started with the people of this Qumran community. So the Qumran community people, they started this water baptism ritual. And their baptism was a baptism of repentance, which even John the Baptist talked about. Now the question is, of course, these people, because they lived in the desert, when food was scarce, oftentimes they would collect locusts and they would eat locusts. So the locusts and the wild honey that they found was their main staple. And they tried to cultivate little things, but not much. So they lived a very basic subsistence in terms of life. And most of the people, they did not wear normal clothes. They either wore sackcloth or they wore animal garment, And now you can see where John the Baptist came from, because all the things that we see about John the Baptist, very similar to this Essene community. Why was John the Baptist over here? You think about it. John the Baptist, his father and mother, when you read Luke chapter 1, was born to Elizabeth and to Zechariah when they were extremely old in their years. When Zechariah went to the temple, as was his duty, that day God, an angel appeared to him and told him, "You're going to have a son." He didn't believe. And so he was struck dumb until John was born. Okay, so we see that over there. So probably John the Baptist, his father and mother, because they were already very old, and when John the Baptist was born, maybe they did take care of him for a period of time, but probably one of them died very early. I don't know whether it was the father who died early or the mother who died early, but then the child was very small, maybe 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, I don't know. One of the parents decided, I will hand him over to this community. And so probably John the Baptist was handed over to this community where he grew up. And the fact that he talks about the Messiah is proof that he was part of this community, because the concept and the talk and the spreading of the Messiah, who the Messiah was prominently talked about in this community. John the Baptist did only one thing. He came out of this community, went into the common people and started preaching to them what was being taught in this community. So that's how John the Baptist became the forerunner for the coming of the Messiah, because John the Baptist was not the forerunner. Okay, John the Baptist prepared the way for the coming of the Messiah. The real forerunner was this Essene community. They prepared John the Baptist, and John the Baptist prepared the way for the coming of the Messiah. That's how John the Baptist was the forerunner. So this was the community where all this began. And today only leftovers are found in this place. You know why? Because I'm going to talk to you. These are the coins that they found in some of those, pots. When a scroll was about to be damaged and it was torn very badly and due to use, what would they do? They would not throw the scroll into a dustbin, but rather they would put the scroll into long jars and they would seal it very tightly and they would preserve it in the caves. That's how many of these ancient scrolls were there. Because it was very sacred, they could not destroy it, so they would ceremonially seal it and keep it in these caves. And the dry habitat of the desert preserved these 1,000-year-old scrolls older than the manuscripts that we had. So that's how these scrolls were preserved. But this community, what happened to this community? Today, if you go, you will find that there is a tram car that leads the way from that Essene community, the Qumran community, all the way to the top of a mountain in its neighborhood. This mountain was a fortress mountain. Okay, and if you look downward, you can see the way you can walk and come, or else you can come through this, special cable car. Okay, through this cable car, you could come to the top. And here's the cable car. Okay, and here you can see people walking. जो लोग अपना शक्ति दिखाना चाहते हैं, पैदल चल के ऊपर आ सकते हैं. I mean, those people who want to show that they are really, very strong and they can walk the mountain by themselves, so they come like this. Other people come in the comfort of a cable car. And at the bottom, you can see, can you see this? I don't know if you can see this, line-like thing. There's a line over here, and then there's a square over here. There's another square over here. So what is that? I'm going to explain that in a little while. Now, this is actually the picture of the mountain, that fortress mountain. If you look at the right side, you can see this kind of a slope. Okay, originally, this slope wasn't there. Originally, this was a slope that was built later on, but the slope wasn't there at all. It was a sheer cliff on all directions. And there was only one secret way into these mountains where you could come to the top. What did Herod do? Now, we may talk about many bad things about Herod, and indeed he turned the land of Israel into a bloodbath. There are many things that are very sordid about him, but one thing that was really fantastic about him was that he was an engineering genius. The way in which The temple of Jerusalem was rebuilt by Herod. Not just that temple. You take the city that is by the seaside, by the seaside, called Caesarea Maritima. Like that, or the city of Sebaste. The Herod built about 8 cities, and all those 8 cities are engineering marvels. And one of the engineering marvels is this fortress called Matsada. Okay, this is called as the fortress of Matsada. And what did Herod do? He built palaces here on the top. He had this is a scaled model. You can see the palace over here, this side, and there were living quarters for the army and a few people and servants and all to stay. Okay, and this is the real mountain as it looks now from the front side. And you'll be very surprised. There are 3 levels over here, and you'll find he has got living quarters for Herod to stay. There is swimming pool over here. There is ample amount of cisterns in this region to store water in the desert. And it's an engineering marvel how he managed to get water supply into this place. Another engineering marvel is the city of Caesarea by the seaside, where there is no drinkable water in that place. But he built, aqueducts by which water could come to Caesarea. And Caesarea Maritima I'm talking about, not Caesarea Philippi. And that is also an engineering marvel. Now, this is one of the engineering marvels. This is called as the fortress of Matsada. Why did Herod build this? Because he was afraid of an Egyptian invasion. And he thought that if an invasion takes place in the land of Israel, he can come and hold himself up over here. And had enough water and enough supply to last them through 3 years of siege. So this was a fortress of Matsada, a place where you can find refuge. You know what happened? Later on, we find in this of course a scaled model, the way in which as it really looked when Herod had built. This is how it is. Today I was showing you pictures which were only the remains of what is left over there, but this was how it originally looked, a scaled model. And this is of course the same model in close-up. You can see, the different places where there is a swimming pool and all that. And here is the mountain again from a distance to show you. Here you can see a ramp like sand built over here. It was not there originally. It was just a sheer cliff. And I'll tell you why that ramp came into existence. Now later on in history we find that in AD 70, Vespasian, at that time he was the general, and he attacked Jerusalem. Before Vespasian attacked Jerusalem, his father tried to attack Jerusalem, was not so successful. So he came to this region over here. And in this region, who was there in this mountain? They were holed up over here, the Jewish zealots who were fighting for their country's national freedom, and they were holed up in this fortress of Matsada. Next to the fortress of Matsada, we find, of course, if you go down, all the way down, you will find the Qumran community. So what he did was, he completely wiped out the Qumran community. And what they did is, before they could die and before they were invaded by the Romans, they hid all their scrolls in these desert caves, which were discovered in 1947. They perished as a community. Even the Qumran community, the Essene people, they built a refuge in the desert thinking nobody will come to them. But they were wiped out by the Roman army in AD 68. In AD 70, Vespasian took over as the general. His father became the emperor. And then he completely destroyed Jerusalem. After destroying Jerusalem and the Jewish zealots over there, no stone was left. The temple of Jerusalem was made into ground zero. Then in AD 73, Vespasian came to this mountain where the Jewish zealots were hiding. And they were confident that they had supplies to last them 3 years. So what did the Roman army do? They completely surrounded the mountain. Now you can see over here, this line over here. What was this line? It was a big wall they had built all around the mountain, so that no Jewish zealot would be able to cross this wall and escape. And these square things that you see over here, this square structure over here, this square structure, these are all the Roman garrisons that surrounded the mountain to finish off the Roman zealots. And then here is what we are seeing. From the top of Matsada, we are looking down into the ramp. And you can see a black structure over here. I'll go close up and show this to you. This ramp was not there. But the Romans, they built this ramp to break into the mountain. And they got their machines and their engines and whatever they had with them. And they poured sand and mud and poured it until they built a ramp enough to break through the fortress of Matsada. And how did they do it? They had, now this is the ramp when we are looking at from down. They built this ramp so that they could break into the fortress of Matsada. This is completely what the Romans did. This structure was not there originally, but it was built by the Romans to break the stronghold of the fortress of Matsada. And when we go down, now people trek this place and they see the current has gone out in my house. So, but you can still see the screen. Okay. And here is this fortress looking from a distance. And you can see the ramp that was built by the Romans. And then further, you can see this machine, which I showed you in the distance, like a small black thing. This is actually a machine that would throw boulders, huge boulders. So basically and these are the boulders that you will see on the top of the fortress of Matsada that were thrown by the Roman army. And this is how we could call this as the ancient system of carpet bombing. Okay, that's what they did. They destroyed this fortress by using these, throwing these stones from those machines. And so what we are seeing is again another fortress built by Herod, believing that nobody could break through. The zealots had holed up and they stayed over here, and even they could not escape from the Roman Empire. Another refuge in history, and they did not survive the attack of the Roman army. One more refuge, and they did not survive. I showed you the refuge of Koziba, St. George of Koziba, where the monks were holed up. And in 600 AD, they were wiped off, the 14 monks who were there by the Persians. And this happened in 73 AD in the fortress of Matsada. It was completely destroyed. And then when we come to 2nd Chronicles and chapter 20, in the 2nd verse, we read a verse which says, some men came and told Jehoshaphat, a vast army is coming against you from Edom, that is from the Dead Sea. It is already at Hazazon Tamar, that is En-Gedi. So I'm going to take you to this place called En-Gedi. Okay. Now this is the place from where you have to walk to En-Gedi. Now can you see this camel? So people come in their buses or vehicles, they can get down, and from here you have to walk to the place called En-Gedi. And you can see this is the sea level. That means where is this boy? He is below the sea level. Okay, the camel is also almost below the sea level. So from here, if you look all the 4 directions, standing in this place, this is what you will see. Nothing but desert landscape in all the 4 directions. But we are going to travel through this desert now, and I'm going to show you what happens when we walk through this desert to a lonely place. Okay, the current has come back. You can all see me. In 1 Samuel chapter 23, 29, we read, and David went up from there and lived in the stronghold of En-Gedi. Again, the name En-Gedi. I'm going to take you to this En-Gedi. And 24th chapter, 1 Samuel, after Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So in that desert, which I showed you in all the directions, when you walk inside, suddenly you'll come to a place like this, where there is flowing water. Today it has become a picnic spot. But this is the place where David was hiding from Saul. This is not a man-made refuge, but it's a refuge that God has made naturally. There is water and there is food that you can find in the locality around. And if you look very carefully, you'll find creatures like this, in that region. Let me show you a close-up. This is called as the rock badger, okay, or the rock hyrax. It's called, the scientific name for that is Procavia capensis, and the variety is syriaca. So genus is Procavia, species is capensis. This creature you will find there. The same creature, if you go to another region and you see it in the desert, it is very shy, it will never come near you. But in this particular place in Engadi, if you come, these creatures are friendly because a lot of tourists come, they have a picnic over there. Israelis themselves come over there, have picnic over there, and they throw tidbits to them. So these creatures have become very friendly. And there in the distance, I just zoomed my camera far away. I saw something very tiny. So I zoomed to see what was that. And this is what we see over there. Okay. And what we often mistake as a deer. In Psalm 42, David says, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul pants for God. When he was hiding at En-gedi, he has seen this kind of a creature, this deer, come to the water and drinking to escape from the desert. So he, at that point, when David was at En-gedi, he was only praying these things. That God, when I am thirsty, I'm drinking over here. When that creature is thirsty in the desert, it is drink over here. As the deer is panting for the water, so my soul is panting for you. So that's what David says. Now, a close-up of this I've taken, which was, I saw one of these creatures walking close by, and some people call it as a deer. In fact, it's not a deer. The Persian fallow deer, okay, in the scientific name for that is Dama mesopotamica. That means Mesopotamica is the variety, but Dama is the genus and the species. That's this creature that you see over here. Okay, that's not this creature which you see over here. That's the Persian fallow deer, but this is not the Persian fallow deer. It's some other creature. Because the Persian fallow deer, called as Yahmur in Hebrew, is a deer of the plains. It doesn't live in the mountains. And this, what we see over here in common language, is called as a Nubian ibex. The Nubian ibex is neither a deer nor an ibex. It's a mountain goat. In Hebrew, this Nubian ibex is called as Iol, okay, for the male mountain stag. And the female is called as Iola. And sometimes Iola is translated in our older Bibles as doe or female deer. And some translators also call this animal as a deer. But no deer are found in the mountains. In the Hebrew language, it is such. They call both the Nubian ibex as a deer and also the Persian fallow deer as a deer. So this is not the Persian fallow deer, it's the Nubian ibex, and the scientific name for that is Capra nubiana. So this is the creature that David talked about, which he saw in that region. In Psalms 18 verse 33, he says, he makes my feet like the feet of deer. He enables me to stand on high. That is this creature, the Nubian ibex. And because deer cannot actually climb on mountains. It is this Nubian ibex, which is also called as deer in Hebrew, that will climb the mountains. And so therefore, what David was actually saying is, even though he was running from Saul, God hid him in the fortress of En-gedi, a natural God-made fortress. And even though there was danger all around, God sustained David and protected him from harm. What we are seeing so far, and this is of course that creature on the top of that mountain, which I just photographed a few minutes back. I'm showing you another picture of it. It would climb mountains, heights of mountains. And David was saying that God is the one who lifts me to heights that normal people cannot reach. And God really did that with David. And where did God hide him? He hid him in this natural fortress, which was made by God. Now let's go to the text and see. In Psalm 18, he also says, 3 times he uses a word. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge. He is my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. If you look at these 3 words, fortress, refuge, stronghold, you know what does it mean? In Hebrew, the word for all these 3 words is not fortress, refuge, and stronghold. The word there in the Hebrew is Metsuda. The word Matsada actually means fortress, refuge, and stronghold. So there was a fortress of Matsada. And in that fortress of Matsada, the Jewish zealots were holed up, but he did not save them. Man-made fortresses cannot save you. I don't know what is your man-made fortress. Maybe your bank account is your security. Maybe you have a house and property, and maybe that is your security. And because of the thinking that your property is your security, you have all kinds of quarrels and fights and law cases and suits with your family members so that you can get that security. That's not your security. Today we are, struck by a lockdown because of a disease that is so dangerous, and you think that by putting masks and various other things, we have security because we are safe and we are isolated from each other. Our security is actually God. The fortress of St. George of Koziba, the monastery of Koziba, didn't last. In 600 AD, it was wiped out by Persians. In 73 AD, the fortress of Matsada, which means refuge in the Hebrew language, that was wiped out. Man-made fortresses don't last. I don't know what is your fortress. Our fortress is our God. Our refuge is our God. Here I'm showing you pictures again of that same plant that I'd shown you earlier in the beginning of the PowerPoint presentation. This is that plant which is called as Capparis aegyptica, or the Egyptian caper. And if you go to the land of Israel, you'll find this everywhere. Now, where is this plant now growing? This is the wall of Jerusalem. You'll find it growing in the wall of Jerusalem. Okay, you'll find it growing on the rooftops of houses. You'll find it growing in the desert ground between the rocks. You'll find it on the top of the mountains. No matter how much you cut it and shave it and try to destroy it, it continues to spring up and crop up and grow again. You can't really destroy this plant. Many of the Israelites will say the same thing about themselves. They say, we are like that. We are God's people. No matter how many times people cut us and destroy us, we still continue to survive. The Holocaust tried to wipe out the Jewish nation. If you go into so many countries, Russia and even Europe, there were so many pogroms to completely wipe out the Jewish community in those lands, but still they survived. And they say that we are like this plant. No matter how many times people cut us, we continue to spring up and we survive because no one can destroy us because God is with us. I actually think that we Christians are like this plant. Those of us who believe in Jesus Christ and we believe in God, we are like this plant. We may be struck down, but we are not destroyed. We may fall down, but we do not perish. Paul talks about it in his epistles. We stay steady forever because God is the one who gives us refuge. So today, I took you through these 3 different refuges in the Old Testament just to show you that man-made refuges don't last. But the refuges that God makes, they last. This is that plan that I showed you. And our refuge is in God. And if we trust in Him, He keeps us safe. I don't know what is your refuge today. I don't know what you're worried about and you're running from. I can only tell you one thing, that all my life I can give you many examples. I'm now at a fag end of my life, probably in the last ebb of my life, probably in the last leg of my journey to be with God. But I can tell you so many experiences of my life where God kept me safe. Maybe it's a time that I talk about this some other time, but at this point, I want to just stop and tell you that God is our refuge. Don't think about man made refuges, whatever they may be, because God is our refuge. If you're worried about where your next food on the table will come, God is your refuge. He will provide. He provided for Elijah with ravens. God will provide you in some way or the other. For the past 2 weeks, because of the pain in my leg and in my abdomen, the lower part, I could not go to the market to buy vegetables. And so I was a little worried, how will I go? All my vegetables are over. There is my food stock is getting over. How will I go? Yesterday, I just called up one of my church members here, and this girl, she works in a parlor. And I asked her, so how are you doing? I was happy to see you at our Sunday worship service. She said, Pastor, I'm doing very fine. I went to Pastor's house, Pastor Shubhasan's house, and yesterday, and he wanted me to buy some vegetables for him. So I went and purchased some vegetables and I took them to his house. I said, if that's the case, why don't you help me also out? She said, Pastor, but you didn't ask me. If you asked me, I'd have straight away got anything for you. So she came today morning in her scooter and she got some vegetables for me. And then she took me in the scooter to the supermarket nearby and I got some basic provisions for me. You know, God is our refuge. When we talk to God, we tell Him, and sometimes even we don't need to pray. In Isaiah 65, it says, before they call me, I will answer. That's the God we have. Don't make anything else as a refuge in this world. Man made refuges are there umpteen, but they will all perish. And therefore, my dear friends, continue to trust in God. Let us just bow down in prayer. And when we go into this time of prayer, I want you to think about what God is speaking to you today. What is the fear that you need to shed aside? What do you want to do as you surrender yourself to God? Make your prayer to God, and God is going to sustain you at this time. Let us bow down our heads in prayer. Let us use this time to be silent. And wherever we are at this particular time, I would like you to make your own prayer to God and say, God, I've heard so much from the scriptures, and I want you to hear my voice. It can be anything to do with your studies or your exams or the provisions in the house or your future work or post retirement, your struggles. Whatever be your problems, God is our refuge. In the midst of all the chaos that is happening in today's world, the chaos is just unimaginable. There is Delhi, which is going to go through earthquakes, tremors. There are locusts over there. There is a disease that has spread, wiped out most of the world. We are all living in the last days. No matter what happens, I want to tell you, my dear friends, our refuge is in God. Let us take this time to allow God to come into our hearts right now and fill us with that great degree of peace, that kind of peace that passeth all understanding, the kind of peace that the world cannot give and the world cannot snatch. May that kind of peace rule our hearts and minds. We make that prayer now. I'm not going to pray immediately now. I like to give you a time of silence where each of you can make your own prayer to God, because this is a sacred moment between you and God, and why would I try to intervene in between? So let God speak to you, and I should allow you to speak to God right now. So let us close our eyes and bow down our heads and use this time of silence to pray to God. Let's bow down our heads in prayer. Let us pray. Give me, O Lord, a steadfast heart, which no disturbing thought can drag downward. Give me, O Lord, an unconquered heart, which no tribulation can wear away. Give me, O Lord, an upright heart, which no unworthy purpose may tempt aside. And bestow upon me also, O Lord my God, understanding to know you, diligence to seek you, wisdom to find you, and a faithfulness that will keep on embracing you through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.